Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and I want to talk about the role of a dungeon performer as identity architect. And actually, what are you talking about, dungeon performer? What are you talking about, identity architect? I think it's time to leave behind the term player in Dungeons & Dragons. So you have a dungeon master. That's a huge title, right? Like, that's a really important, good, solid title, right? It says something. It's meaningful, and I think it carries the weight of what you're doing, right? Whereas player, first of all, there isn't a term for for Dungeons and Dragons players. You have to say Dungeons & Dragons player. You can't just say with Dungeon Master, you say Dungeon Master. If you say Dungeon Player, nobody really understands what that is. I say Dungeon Performer because I think even right now, many Dungeons & Dragons players understand that they are performing a role, right? The top tier of Dungeons & Dragons players are now understanding that they are really what Gary intended them to be, in my humble opinion, is identity architects. Now, what do we mean by this? Well, when you engage in top tier Dungeons & Dragons, you get into this position where you are creating a Dungeons & Dragons player character. Now, the reality is, you're at a physical table. You're using Dungeons & Dragons canon hardbacks, physicals, right? I'm not really talking about streamed games. I'm not really talking about, you use the character builder on D&D Beyond. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about invested, engaged Dungeons & Dragons players who are playing the game at its ultimate tier version, right? Which is physical table game, 1 to 5 players using D&D canon hardbacks, physical, real dice, all of it's real. None of it is virtual, right? And the reality is, if you're not engaged at that level, nothing that I'm talking about applies to you, right? Like, enjoy what you're doing, but nothing what I'm talking about. Identity architecture is not going to happen in those games. You're going to cut some goblins in half. You're not going to cut your deficiencies in half, right? This is top tier Dungeons & Dragons, right? This is what Gary built at the beginning, and it's what remains the pinnacle of the tabletop role-playing experience now. Now, you can engage with Dungeons & Dragons in tons of ways. The lowest form is like a critter, right? You watch somebody else play Dungeons & Dragons. That's the lowest form of Dungeons & Dragons participation, right? I'm talking about the highest form of participation. So let's talk about it. Let's dig into it. What is it? What does it mean, right? So when you get to that point, right, what you really hit is so let's talk about where you arrive at that point when you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, at the point of identity architecture. So if you're a player, you can do identity architecting. You could be an identity architect. And what does that mean? Well, first of all, you're going to build a new identity, and that new identity is your player character, right? Your character. I'm just going to say character going forward, right? So you're going to build your character, right? And you're going to choose your species, which is different. It could be different than you as a human, right? That's huge. You're going to learn something there, right? You're going to choose your class. Your class is certainly different than what you are as a human being right now, right? And then you're going to choose your background, and that is different from what you are right now. Once you have architected that new identity, the moment is finished, right? First of all, this literally at creation, it's real, right? It is a new identity that you inhabit, right? Before the Dungeon Master does anything, right? Because it's fully formed, right? And you already have a concept of what happens in Dungeons & Dragons. And so immediately, you're going to start thinking about your character in Forgotten Realms, in Faerun, on Arcavios, on Dominaria, on Eberron, on every existing Dungeons & Dragons realm, right? In Lego City, right? That one isn't manifested yet, right? But you're like, well, Lego, Dragon's Dragon's Keep Journey's End is almost here. You know, the moment it's here, I'll be able to click it to every single Lego City set, right? So what does this player character look like in Lego City? And a moment that literally the moment you are done crafting and actually you don't even need, none of the mechanics even matter. The moment you've chosen species, class, and background, and given it a name, actually you don't even need to give it a name, right? The moment you've chosen species, class, and background, that is a new identity that you inhabit, right? And the storytelling begins at that literal second, right? And the moment, and then who is that identity exposed to, right? Well, the other players at your table. They are going to be exposed to this new identity that you have architected, that you have built from imagination, moats of imagination, right? And the moment they are exposed to it, they will begin telling stories in their mind, right? So these identities are an array of stories, right? Stories that live in your heart and in your mind, that live in your other players' hearts and the other players' minds. And then the moment you begin speaking and telling stories and telling people about that character, it exists beyond Dungeons and Dragons people, right? And so before you have ever even hit the table, right, there's this new identity, something you have crafted from the ground up, right? And there is nothing like this, right? Because writers don't have this, right? They don't start just talking about characters because people are like, well, where does it fit, right? But the Dungeons and Dragons character is specifically designed to emote infinite stories. It's really, really fascinating and just one of the most beautiful things that's ever been created by an American. It's truly incredible. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.